Hello, I am with the Lewis Conservation District, and today we are talking about dairy nutrient record keeping. And our purpose is that we want to keep our Lewis County farmers compliant with the WSDA requirements. So first, we're going to take a closer look at the record keeping requirements checklist. First on the list is the manure and commercial applications to fields. The important things to note is which fields you're applying on, the date, the amount of nutrients, the type, and the weather conditions the day of and the day before each application. Next up are the manure nutrient tests, and you can bring your manure samples into the conservation district and we can mail them to the lab for you. The same goes for the fall soil tests, which will need to be collected each year. Next up is your nutrient transfer records. You need to note the date and the amount of manure that you're either bringing onto your site or exporting off of your site. And finally, if applicable, your irrigation records and have record of your total irrigation water applied per year to each field. A few other things to note on your record keeping requirements. You need to keep your records for at least 5 years. And it's very helpful to keep extra notes beyond what is required. And this will help tell the story of your farm over the past few years. Finally, you can keep your nutrient application records in a notebook, on a calendar, or using an online spreadsheet, which we will be covering later. Record keeping examples, what not to do. Here we see that somebody has been keeping records using a calendar, but when we take a closer look at May 9th, we see that all it says is one load. And this is missing a lot of the crucial information, as in what was the weather conditions, how much did you apply, what field did you apply to. So this would be insufficient records. Next up is getting better. This shows in January that 3 loads were applied to field 5. However, when I'm looking at this, it doesn't say the amount that was in those loads or what type of manure. And it also doesn't include the exact date or weather conditions. So just saying January is not sufficient. Finally, here is an example of some excellent record keeping. So we can see on March 12th, the weather was sunny, the type of manure applied was liquid, there was 1/2 inch of manure applied and how it was measured. And there are also some comments and notes on the application method that are very helpful as well. We can also see that the field ID is there and the number of acres that it was applied to. If you are looking for where you can get your weather reports that day, you can use Washington State University's Ag Weather Net map, and that will show you the weather station closest to you. Here at the top, you can see the website you go to access this information. Next up, we want to touch base on liquid manure spreader calibration. So feel free to either write this down or take a screenshot of this information. And these are some helpful calculations where you can determine the gallons that your spreader contains in an average load. You can determine the acreage covered by one load, determine gallons applied per acre, and finally determine pounds of nutrients applied per acre. Here's an example on how to read a manure test report. And so when we look at this information, we're going to take a look at the nitrogen, and we want the pounds of nutrients per ton. So for our calculation, we are going to go 100 minus the moisture content, which is 78.57. And then we're going to divide that number by 100. And then that gives us 0.2143. So we're going to take that resulting number and multiply it by our nitrogen, which was 98.8, and that gives us a final number of 21.17 pounds of nitrogen per wet ton. Next up, we're looking at our lagoon water analysis report, and we are going to use that first line for our nitrogen test that tells us that there is 102 pounds per acre inch. And as I said earlier, you can bring all of your samples to the Lewis Conservation District and we will mail them to the lab for you, and then you can come pick up the results. We also have soil probes that you can borrow. So next up, I am going to cover a spreadsheet that we created in Excel that's going to be a very helpful tool for those that prefer to keep their records online. So first off, we have your yearly records. And so yearly records include your irrigation records, so how much water you're applying to each field. They also include your manure transfer records. So what date did you export your manure off-site, or what date did you bring more manure and nutrients onto your site? Finally, it also reiterates your manure nutrient tests. So that's going to be your fall soil tests and your manure testing. And please keep a copy of all your records and have them readily available. A lot of people will keep all of this information in a binder, which is very helpful for organization. And finally, make sure you keep track of any commercial fertilizer nutrients that you applied as well. So the purpose of this spreadsheet that we created is that if you fill out all of this information, you will meet all of the requirements by the WSDA for when you do get your yearly inspection. Next up is an example of your records per field. So here we can see it asks field number. We can just say field number 1, 20 acres. You can put things like your soil type, your last date planted and what is planted in that field, and your manure and commercial fertilizer applications. So we looked at an example very similar to this earlier where it has date applied, nutrient source, application method, how much you applied in the unit, and then your rainfall one day before and your rainfall the day of. Next up is your crop nutrient needs, and you are going to be referring to your dairy nutrient plan that was created by the Conservation District. And so that is going to be a very helpful tool in your nutrient management, and you are going to find some of the numbers in there that you're going to plug in. So you can add the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium nutrient needs from Section 5 of your plan. Finally, this calculation is used to determine the nitrogen applied by grazing. So we see that we have just some example numbers plugged in here, but of course you are going to tailor this to your farm and your exact situation. So we have the number of animals that you're grazing. Here it was 100. Number of days grazing is 50. Number of hours a day on the fields, this is 12 hours a day on average. And then what is the average weight of your beef or your dairy cattle? And finally, you have the acres of your field, and then the animal units will be calculated. And then this is going to give you the final number, which will be total nitrogen applied by grazing. And when you plug in the numbers above, it's going to calculate all of this for you because it's taking into account the amount of nitrogen lost by mineralization, denitrification, and volatilization. And finally, you will find a very helpful conversion chart that you can look back at if you need any help with any of the calculations. So please feel free to reach out to the Lewis Conservation District if you have any questions on how to use these tools to record your record keeping and your nutrient management, or if you need any help when you're looking at your dairy plan, we will be happy to come out and help and go over it for you so that we can make sure that everybody is taking amazing records. Thank you.